Avery Calloway, 32, sat motionless in her father's attorney's office as the words echoed in her ears. The family home valued at $800,000 will go entirely to your sister Madison. 20 years of being the responsible daughter, the one who sacrificed everything for family, and now this betrayal cut deeper than any knife. But instead of crying, Avery just smiled. They had no idea what was coming next. Before I continue with my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy family drama stories with unexpected twists. Trust me, you'll want to see how this betrayal unfolds when karma comes back around. My smile that day wasn't defeat, it was the beginning of a perfect storm they never saw coming. Growing up in the sprawling Victorian house in Westfield, Connecticut, Avery always felt the weight of uneven expectations. The Calloway family dynamic had been established early. Madison was the golden child, while Avery was the afterthought. Their father, Richard, a successful investment banker with salt and pepper hair and perpetually tired eyes, beamed with pride at Madison's every achievement. Their mother, Eleanor, a former beauty queen turned socialite, spent hours preparing Madison for pageants and social events, buying her designer clothes and paying for expensive hobbies. Madison has such potential, their parents would say. She's going to make something spectacular of herself. Meanwhile, Avery's academic achievements and quiet determination went largely unnoticed. The disparity was evident in the family photographs lining the hallway. Madison front and center, Avery tucked into corners almost as an afterthought. Christmas mornings revealed the same pattern, Madison receiving lavish gifts while Avery received practical items, often with price tags still attached, showing they'd been hastily purchased as an obligation. Despite this, Avery never complained. She excelled in school, graduating as valedictorian, earning a full scholarship to Yale for her undergraduate degree and later completing her MBA at Columbia Business School. Throughout these accomplishments, her parents offered perfunctory congratulations, their attention quickly returning to Madison's latest boyfriend, drama, or career indecision. "You're always so self-sufficient," Avery, her mother, would say, not realizing this wasn't a compliment, but a sad reflection of how Avery had been forced to become her own cheerleader and support system. "Madison needs our help more than you do." When their grandmother passed away, leaving behind family heirlooms, Madison received the valuable jewelry collection while Avery got a worn leather journal. "Madison will showcase these pieces properly," their mother had explained. "You're not really the jewelry type, dear." The pattern continued into adulthood. When Avery started her financial consulting business, she invited her family to the office opening. Her father attended for precisely 30 minutes before leaving to watch Madison's amateur theater performance. Her mother didn't come at all, claiming she needed to help Madison prepare for her role. What hurt most was that Avery genuinely loved her sister. Madison, 3 years younger, hadn't asked for this preferential treatment. She'd simply grown accustomed to it, developing an unconscious entitlement that colored their relationship. There were moments of genuine sisterly connection, late-night conversations during holiday visits, inside jokes from childhood, but always shadowed by the knowledge that in their parents' eyes they would never be equal. Avery's romantic relationships suffered as well. Her high school boyfriend Jason once pointed out how she always seemed surprised by his attention. "It's like you don't believe anyone would choose you first," he'd said, before they parted ways for college. Later partners noted her tendency to overachieve, to be perfect, to earn love rather than expect it freely. Throughout her 20s, Avery built a life separate from her family's influence. She established her financial consulting firm in Boston, specializing in helping women achieve financial independence. She developed close friendships that became her chosen family. She adopted a rescue dog named Einstein, who greeted her with unquestioning devotion each evening. When their father had his first heart attack at 65, Avery drove the 3 hours from Boston to Connecticut every weekend for 2 months to help with his recovery. She researched heart-healthy diets, interviewed home health aides, and organized his medications. Madison visited, occasionally bringing flowers and entertaining their father with gossip, but leaving the actual care to Avery. "You're so good at handling these details," their mother said. Madison gets too emotional around medical situations. 4 years later, when their father announced his retirement and intention to update his estate planning, Avery hadn't expected equal treatment, but she also hadn't expected to be completely overlooked. The family home had been purchased by their great-grandparents. 4 generations of Callaways had grown up within those walls. The property had appreciated significantly over decades, now worth $800, 0 inches, the desirable Connecticut suburb. "Your sister has always had a special connection to this house," her father had said during one of Avery's visits, not knowing he was foreshadowing the betrayal to come. "She sees it as part of her identity." Avery had nodded, swallowing her objection that she too had memories in every corner of that house. Her height marks penciled on the kitchen door frame, the window seat in the library where she'd read hundreds of books, the creaky third, a step she'd learned to skip when sneaking downstairs for midnight snacks. Now, sitting in the attorney's office, Avery understood that in her parents' eyes she had always been and would always be an afterthought. 20 years of being the responsible daughter had meant nothing. The inheritance decision wasn't about fairness or contribution, it was simply the culmination of a lifetime of preferential treatment that had become so normalized they couldn't even see its cruelty. But something had changed in Avery. The familiar pain of being overlooked had crystallized into clarity. For the first time, she saw her family not as she wished them to be, but as they truly were. And with that clarity came a determination she had never allowed herself before. She smiled not because she was okay with their decision, but because she finally understood that seeking their approval had always been a losing game. Now she would play by different rules. 3 weeks after the devastating inheritance revelation, Avery found herself alone in the family home, having volunteered to begin clearing out her parents' personal items before Madison officially took possession. Her parents had already relocated to their new beachfront condo in Florida, eager to start their retirement lifestyle. Madison was on a 2-week European vacation with her latest boyfriend to process the emotional weight of inheriting the family legacy, as she dramatically explained. The irony wasn't lost on Avery. While Madison celebrated her windfall abroad, Avery was sorting through decades of family history, categorizing items into keep, donate, and discard piles. It was thankless work, but Avery had always been the one to handle the practical aspects of family life. On the second day, while clearing out her father's home office, Avery discovered a hidden compartment in the antique roll-top desk, a secret drawer released by pressing a specific carved rosette. Inside was a worn leather portfolio containing documents that made her blood run cold. Proof that their family's wealth hadn't come solely from her father's legitimate banking career as they'd always believed. The portfolio contained offshore account statements, correspondence with shell companies, and coded ledgers detailing decades of financial fraud. Richard Callaway, respected community pillar and family patriarch, had been embezzling from his investment clients for years. Most disturbing was a list of victims, primarily elderly widows and retirees who had trusted him with their life savings. Next to each name was a dollar amount and status: active, closed, or most chillingly deceased. Avery's financial background allowed her to quickly comprehend the magnitude of the scheme. Her father had targeted vulnerable clients, diverting portions of their investments into his personal accounts through a complex web of transactions. The total misappropriated over 20 years exceeded $3 million. This money had funded their comfortable lifestyle, the house renovations, Madison's expensive hobbies, their mother's luxury car, the college funds that Avery hadn't needed thanks to her scholarships. With shaking hands, Avery found documentation of the most recent transaction dated just 2 months earlier. This wasn't historical evidence of past misdeeds, her father was still actively stealing from trusting clients. Among the victims was Mrs. Abernathy, Avery's former piano teacher who had given her free lessons when she discovered Avery's talent. The kind woman who had attended Avery's recitals when her own parents were too busy with Madison's activities. According to the ledger, Mrs. Abernathy had lost over $180,000, her entire retirement fund. Another name leaped from the page: Gerald Winters, the grandfather of Avery's college roommate and best friend Zoe. Mr. Winters had lost his wife to cancer 5 years ago and had been investing his savings to leave something for his grandchildren. Richard had stolen $245,000 from him. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by evidence of her father's crimes, Avery experienced waves of emotion: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally a cold, clarifying fury. The family's comfortable lifestyle, the very house that Madison was now inheriting, had been built on stolen money from people like Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Winters. People who had shown Avery more kindness than her own parents ever had. This revelation cast her family's treatment of her in an even more painful light. Not only had she been the overlooked daughter, but she had also unwittingly benefited from her father's crimes. Her childhood, her education, even the food she'd eaten growing up, all potentially paid for with stolen funds. As the night deepened, Avery meticulously photographed every document, creating digital backups and organizing the evidence. Her MBA training and financial expertise served her well as she traced the money flows, identifying victims and calculating damages. By dawn, she had compiled a comprehensive record of her father's fraud, including transaction dates, amounts, and account details. The decision of what to do next wasn't easy. Exposing her father would destroy her family. Her mother, though materialistic and emotionally distant, likely had no knowledge of the crimes. Madison, self-absorbed as she was still Avery's sister. And despite everything, part of Avery still loved her father, the man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had silently slipped a congratulatory note under her door after she was accepted to Yale, who had in his limited way tried to be a good parent. But stronger than these familial bonds was Avery's sense of justice and her empathy for the victims. Mrs. Abernathy was living in a small apartment, now having downsized after investment losses. Mr. Winters had postponed retirement, taking a night security job at 72 because his investments hadn't performed as expected. The inheritance decision suddenly made perverse sense. By giving Madison the house, their father had ensured his favorite daughter would benefit from his crimes while legally distancing himself from the asset. If investigations ever uncovered his fraud, the house would be safe from seizure or restitution claims because it was no longer in his name. As morning light filtered through the office windows, Avery made her decision. She couldn't allow her father's victims to continue suffering. She couldn't allow Madison to benefit from an $800,000 gift purchased with stolen money. And she couldn't continue to be the dutiful daughter who silently accepted whatever scraps of attention her family deigned to give her. She carefully returned the documents to the hidden compartment. No one needed to know she had discovered them, not yet. First, she needed a plan, one that would ensure justice for the victims while forcing her family to face the consequences of not just her father's financial fraud, but also their emotional betrayal of her. As Avery left the office, closing the door behind her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with seeking her family's approval. For the first time, she understood why she'd smiled in the attorney's office. It wasn't acceptance, it was anticipation. The game was about to change, and only Avery knew the rules. For the next 3 months, Avery lived a double life. On the surface, she was the same dutiful daughter her family had always taken for granted. She helped Madison move into the family home, listened to her sister's elaborate renovation plans with feigned interest, and maintained cordial weekly calls with her parents who were settling into their Florida retirement. "The house looks amazing with Madison's touch," her mother gushed during one call. "She's having the foyer repainted in this gorgeous sage green that really brings out the architectural details you never appreciated." Avery murmured appropriate responses while typing an email to a forensic accountant she had hired under strict confidentiality agreements. Beneath this compliant facade, Avery was meticulously building her case. She established a secure email address and rented a private office under an LLC name, creating a headquarters for her investigation. Her financial expertise proved invaluable as she tracked money flows across multiple accounts and jurisdictions. The deeper she dug, the more extensive her father's fraud appeared. Richard Calloway had started small, skimming modest amounts from a few clients' accounts. Over time, his embezzlement grew bolder, targeting specifically vulnerable clients who either trusted him implicitly or lacked the financial literacy to notice discrepancies. The pattern was consistent with the psychological profile of a long-term fraudster: initial rationalization, followed by escalation as the perpetrator becomes more confident. Avery identified 32 victims in total, with combined losses exceeding $3.4 million. The fraud had funded not only their family's lifestyle but also her father's secret gambling habit, a revelation that explained his frequent business trips to Atlantic City and Las Vegas. Particularly disturbing was evidence that her father had accelerated his fraudulent activities in the 5 years before retirement, seemingly building a nest egg for himself and Eleanor while planning to transfer assets to Madison to shield them from potential discovery. The timing of the inheritance decision was no coincidence. During this investigation phase, Avery reconnected with Mrs. Abernathy, ostensibly to take refresher piano lessons. The 70-year-old woman lived in a small one-bedroom apartment. Now her baby grand piano replaced by an electronic keyboard. "I had to make some adjustments after my investments didn't perform as your father predicted," Mrs. Abernathy explained, offering Avery tea in a chipped mug. "But I'm managing. Music sustains me even if the instrument isn't what it once was." Avery also arranged a lunch with Zoe, during which she carefully asked about her friend's grandfather. "He's working as a night guard at a warehouse," Zoe sighed. "At his age, he should be relaxing and enjoying his grandchildren, but he says he can't afford to retire yet. Something about his investments tanking a few years ago. Your dad was his advisor, right? Did he ever mention what happened?" Each interaction strengthened Avery's resolve. These weren't just names in a ledger. They were real people whose lives had been diminished by her father's greed and her family's entitled consumption. Meanwhile, Madison was embracing her role as the lady of the manor. She hosted lavish housewarming parties, joined the country club, and began dating the son of the town's mayor. Her Instagram showcased extensive renovations to the house, paid for with a home equity loan against the property's value. "I deserve this," Madison told Avery during a video call, panning her phone to show off the newly installed marble countertops in the kitchen. "Dad always said I was meant for this kind of life." In Florida, Richard and Eleanor were equally oblivious, sending Avery photos of their beachfront condo and new golf club memberships. Neither seemed concerned about how their blatant favoritism had affected their older daughter, or indeed whether she had sufficient resources for her own future. By the 4th month, Avery had compiled a comprehensive dossier on her father's crimes. She consulted discreetly with a former SEC investigator, paying in cash and using only her first name. The investigator confirmed what she already suspected: her father had committed multiple felonies, including wire fraud, mail fraud, and investment advisor fraud. If prosecuted, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. "This is textbook affinity fraud," the ex-investigator told her. He exploited relationships of trust within his community. "Judges don't look kindly on this type of case, especially with elderly victims," With the evidence secure, Avery moved to the next phase of her planned confrontation. She needed her family to understand exactly what they had done, both her father with his financial crimes and all of them with their emotional betrayal. But simply reporting her father to authorities wouldn't achieve the complex justice she sought. She wanted accountability, restitution for the victims, and recognition of how profoundly they had hurt her. She scheduled a family weekend at the house, claiming she wanted to see Madison's renovations and had news to share about her business. Her parents agreed to fly in from Florida, eager to see the improvements to the home they no longer owned. The night before the gathering, Avery sat in her Boston apartment, reviewing her strategy one final time. On her desk lay 3 envelopes, one containing a letter to the FBI outlining her father's crimes with copies of key evidence, another addressed to the state regulatory board that licensed financial advisors, and the third to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal who specialized in financial fraud stories. Next to these was a 4th envelope containing documents establishing a victim restitution fund already seeded with $250,000 of Avery's own savings money she had earned through legitimate hard work, unlike her family's ill-gotten gains. The plan was set. Tomorrow, she would give her family a choice. Either they would acknowledge both forms of betrayal and help make things right, or she would mail the envelopes and watch their comfortable world collapse. As she packed an overnight bag for the trip to Connecticut, Avery felt a strange calm. For years, she had been the family doormat, desperate for scraps of approval. Now, she was taking control not from a place of revenge, but from a commitment to justice and self-respect. Her phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, sis. Wait till you see what I've done with your old bedroom. It's a home gym now. Dad and Mom will be here around noon." XOXO. Avery smiled as she replied, looking forward to it. "I have some surprising news to share with everyone." If only they knew just how surprising it would be. The next day dawned crisp and clear, a perfect New England autumn Saturday. Avery arrived at the family home at 11:30 a.m. intentionally early to center herself before the confrontation. Madison greeted her with an enthusiastic hug, oblivious to what was coming. "Avery, you look amazing! That new haircut really suits you," Madison gushed, pulling her inside. "Come see what I've done with the place. I think even you will approve despite your minimalist tastes." The house had indeed been transformed. Gone were the traditional furnishings and family photographs, replaced with trendy decor that looked straight from a high-end catalog. The renovations had erased nearly every trace of the childhood Avery remembered, as if Madison was determined to claim not just the physical space, but also its history. "Your old bedroom is now my personal gym," Madison said proudly, showing Avery the room where she'd spent 18 years of her life. The walls were now mirrored her window seat, replaced by a Peloton bike. "I figure I never really used the guest room, and this has better light for morning workouts." Avery nodded, maintaining her composure. "It's certainly different," she said mildly. Their parents arrived at 1215, bringing Florida sunshine and matching tans. Eleanor kissed Avery's cheek distantly before embracing Madison with genuine warmth. Richard gave Avery an awkward side hug, then immediately began admiring Madison's renovations. "You've really made this place your own, princess," he said, surveying the living room. "Smart investment, too. Property values in this neighborhood are still climbing." Lunch was served on the new patio, catered by Madison's favorite local restaurant. The conversation revolved around their parents' golf scores, Madison's dating life, and repeated compliments about the house transformation. No one asked Avery about her life or work until dessert was served. "So, Avery, Eleanor finally said Madison mentioned you had some business news, a new client perhaps." The moment had arrived. Avery set down her coffee cup and looked at each family member in turn. "Actually, I've been working on a special project for the past few months. A financial investigation of sorts." Oh, her father said interest peaked. Forensic accounting, that's a lucrative field. Very lucrative, Avery agreed. Especially when you uncover major fraud. She paused, then added quietly, like the kind you've been perpetrating for the past 20 years, Dad. The patio fell silent. Madison froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Eleanor looked confused. Richard's face drained of color. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. Avery opened her laptop and turned it to face them. I found your hidden records in the desk drawer. The offshore accounts. The list of victims. All of it. She clicked through a slideshow of document images, account statements, transfer records, the victim list with Mrs. Abernathy's and Mr. Winter's names highlighted. That's private property, Richard hissed, reaching for the laptop. Avery pulled it back. Actually, it's evidence of multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud, securities fraud, mail fraud, RICO violations. Avery, what are you doing, Madison? Interrupted, her voice shrill. This is crazy. Eleanor placed a trembling hand on her husband's arm. Richard, what is she talking about? Avery continued calmly. The family lifestyle, the vacations, the renovations, Madison's horse riding lessons, Mom's jewelry, it was all funded by stealing from Dad's clients. Vulnerable people who trusted him. The house you're so proudly renovating, Madison. It was paid for with Mrs. Abernathy's retirement fund and Mr. Winter's savings for his grandchildren's education. That's not true, Madison protested, but her voice lacked conviction as she watched their father's reaction. Richard's face had shifted from shock to calculation. Whatever you think you've found, you've misunderstood, he said. Financial advising is complex. Stop, Avery cut him off. I have an MBA in finance and run my own financial consulting firm. I understand perfectly what you did. So would the FBI, the SEC, and the federal prosecutors I've spoken with. She laid 3 envelopes on the table. These contain detailed evidence of your crimes ready to be sent to the authorities, the licensing board, and the Wall Street Journal. I've prepared a complete case against you. Richard stared at the envelopes, the reality of his situation sinking in. Eleanor began to cry quietly while Madison looked back and forth between her parents in confusion. Why are you doing this? Madison finally asked. Is this because of the house? Are you that jealous? Avery met her sister's gaze steadily. This isn't about jealousy, Madison. It's about justice. It's about the fact that Dad stole over $3 million from 32 victims to fund our family's lifestyle, then gave you an $800,000 house bought with stolen money while leaving me nothing. But, more importantly, it's about people like Mrs. Abernathy living in a 1-bedroom apartment at 70 because she lost everything. You would destroy this family over money, Eleanor whispered, mascara running down her cheeks. No, Mom. Dad destroyed this family over money, Avery corrected her. And none of you ever saw me as a full member of this family anyway. I was always the afterthought, the reliable one who would understand when you canceled my recital to attend Madison's soccer game, who would accept that her accomplishments weren't worth celebrating like Madison's. She turned to her sister. Madison, I don't blame you for accepting what they gave you. But I do hold you accountable for never questioning the unfairness for taking it as your due that you would get everything while I got nothing. Madison flushed, unable to meet Avery's eyes. Avery placed a 4th envelope on the table. I've established a victim restitution fund with $250,000 of my own money. Here's what's going to happen. Dad, you're going to contribute every penny of your retirement savings. Mom, the jewelry has to go, and Madison, the house needs to be sold with proceeds going to the victims. That's ridiculous, Madison exclaimed. This is my house now. Actually, it's the proceeds of criminal activity, Avery countered. But I'm giving you a choice, all of you. You can agree to make restitution voluntarily, or I mail these envelopes and let the criminal justice system handle it. In that scenario, Dad goes to prison for 20 years and everything gets seized anyway. Richard financial calculator that he was immediately recognized the better option. How do I know you won't send those letters anyway after we've given up everything? Because unlike you, Dad, I keep my word, Avery said. And because I've arranged for a third-party trustee to oversee the restitution fund, you'll sign legally binding agreements today prepared by my attorney who is waiting for my call. The family stared at the envelopes, then at each other as the magnitude of the situation sank in. Their comfortable world balanced on a knife's edge with Avery, the daughter they had always underestimated, holding the power to tip it into the abyss. You can't expect us to be penniless, Eleanor protested weakly. I don't, Avery replied. You'll each retain enough for modest living expenses. Dad will find work perhaps in retail given his people skills. Madison has her interior design business. And I've arranged for you to sublet a small condo in Florida. Not beachfront, of course. Madison began to cry. Why are you being so cruel? We're family. That's exactly the point, Avery said quietly. We're family. Yet for 32 years, you've treated me as less valuable, less deserving of love and consideration, while simultaneously benefiting from funds stolen from innocent people. Today, that ends. She stood up, gathering her laptop. I'm going inside to call my attorney. You have 1 hour to decide. Make restitution and face personal consequences, or face public and legal consequences as well. Either way, justice happens today. As Avery walked toward the house, she heard her family erupting into accusations and recriminations behind her. Her father's angry denials, her mother's sobs, Madison's increasingly hysterical protests. The facade of the perfect family was crumbling under the weight of truth. In the library, the one room Madison hadn't renovated, Avery sat in her favorite window seat and looked out at the garden where her parents and sister were now arguing intensely. Part of her felt a deep sadness for what might have been if they had simply loved her equally. Another part felt vindication that finally her family was seeing her true strength. She didn't expect them to suddenly appreciate her or make amends for years of emotional neglect. That wasn't the point of today's confrontation. The point was justice for her father's victims and self-respect for herself. After 32 years of seeking approval, Avery was finally acting from her own moral center, regardless of what her family thought. The timer on her phone showed 45 minutes remaining of the hour she'd given them when Richard entered the library alone, his shoulders slumped in defeat. You've won, he said simply. We'll do it your way. Avery looked at her father, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. Not as the idealized parent she'd sought approval from, but as a flawed man who had made terrible choices. This isn't about winning, Dad, she said. It's about doing what's right. For the first time in our family's history, we're going to face reality and take responsibility. She dialed her attorney's number, maintaining eye contact with her father. They've agreed, she said when the call connected. You can bring the papers now. As she ended the call, her father asked, Will you ever forgive me? For any of it? Avery considered the question carefully. I don't know, she answered honestly. That depends on what happens next. Not just the restitution, but whether all of you can finally see me for who I am, not who you wanted me to be. She stood walking past her father to the door. The attorney will be here in 30 minutes. I suggest you prepare Mom and Madison. This is happening today. As she walked down the hallway past the now empty spaces where family photos once hung, Avery felt neither joy nor sadness, but something more complex, the weight of doing what was necessary regardless of personal cost. The house that had never truly been her home would soon belong to neither her nor Madison. Instead, its value would help restore what her father had stolen. I've been sharing some intense moments of this family confrontation, and wow, the emotions are running high. If you're connecting with Avery's journey of standing up for justice and finally being seen, drop a like on this video. I'm curious, have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? The hardest decisions often come when these values conflict. As we continue with this story, you'll see how the aftermath unfolds and whether Avery's family truly learns their lesson. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this family drama resolves. Trust me, the karma that's coming will be worth the wait. The weeks following the confrontation were a hurricane of activity and emotion. Avery's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa Rodriguez, who specialized in financial restitution cases, handled the legal framework with precision. Richard signed over his retirement accounts valued at $1.2 million. Eleanor surrendered her jewelry collection, appraised at $340,000. And most painfully for Madison, the house went on the market with proceeds designated for the victim fund. The family did not go quietly into their reduced circumstances. Eleanor vacillated between tearful pleas for Avery to reconsider and cold fury at the humiliation of downsizing to a modest two-bedroom rental. Richard retreated into grim silence, mechanically signing documents while avoiding eye contact with everyone. Madison cycled through denial, rage bargaining, and finally a sullen acceptance tinged with resentment toward Avery. "You could have just turned Dad in and left me out of it," Madison said during a tense phone call. "The house was legally mine. You had no right to take it away." "The house was never legitimately yours to begin with," Avery replied evenly. "It was purchased and maintained with stolen money. Would you really want to live in luxury while knowing Mrs. Abernathy can barely afford her medications?" Madison had no answer for that. The victim restitution process was complex. Working with forensic accountants, Avery and Vanessa identified all 32 victims and calculated their losses with interest. The combined value of the surrendered assets, Richard's accounts, Eleanor's jewelry, the house which sold quickly for $820,000, plus Avery's initial contribution, created a fund of approximately $2.61 million. Not enough to fully compensate everyone, but substantial enough to make a significant difference. Mrs. Abernathy received a check for $210,000, representing her original investment plus calculated interest. When Avery delivered it personally, the elderly piano teacher burst into tears. "I never understood what happened to my money," she confessed, holding the check with trembling hands. "Your father kept saying it was market fluctuations, but it didn't make sense. I was too embarrassed to question him further. I thought I was simply too ignorant about finance." Mr. Winters similarly received $285,000. Zoe called Avery afterward, her voice choked with emotion. "Grandpa cried when he got the check. He's quitting the night guard job. Said he can finally sleep at night again, literally and figuratively." "Avery, I don't understand what happened, but thank you." Avery didn't explain the full truth to any of the victims. The restitution paperwork cited investment mismanagement requiring correction rather than fraud. She saw no need to further traumatize people who had already suffered enough, and the legal agreements included confidentiality clauses that prevented victims from discussing the settlements publicly. This protected her father from criminal prosecution, though not from professional consequences. As part of the agreement, Richard surrendered his financial advisor licenses and certifications, effectively ending his career. At 69, he found himself applying for retail positions, eventually securing a job as a sales associate at a men's clothing store. Eleanor's adjustment was equally challenging. The rental condo in Florida was a far cry from the beachfront property they'd briefly enjoyed. No country club membership, no luxury car. She took a part-time position at a local boutique to supplement their income, something she hadn't done in 30 years. Madison perhaps suffered the most immediate lifestyle change. From lady of the manor to renting a small apartment, from renovating an $800,000 home to taking on additional interior design clients to make ends meet. The mayor's son stopped calling once she moved to the less prestigious address. Throughout this period, Avery maintained a professional distance from her family. She wasn't seeking revenge or enjoyment from their reduced circumstances, only justice and a rebalancing of their relationship. She provided practical support when needed, helping her parents navigate rental applications and Madison find a reasonable apartment. But she declined their emotional appeals for things to go back to normal. "There is no going back," she told them during a family meeting 6 weeks after the confrontation. "We can only go forward, hopefully, with more honesty and respect than before." The victim restitution process took nearly 3 months to complete. When the final check was mailed, Avery felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her father's victims had received justice, not complete recompense but substantial restoration. The family's ill-gotten gains had been redirected to their rightful owners. The moral ledger, if not perfectly balanced, had at least been addressed. What remained unresolved was the family's emotional dynamics. Could they rebuild relationships on a foundation of truth rather than the preferential treatment and financial fraud that had defined them for decades? Avery wasn't sure, but for the first time, she was approaching her family from a position of strength rather than need. 6 months after the confrontation, Avery received an unexpected email from Madison requesting a meeting. They arranged to meet at a neutral coffee shop halfway between their homes. Madison arrived looking different, less polished, more authentic, without the designer clothes and professional blowout that had been her uniform. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Madison said after they settled with their drinks, "and I've started therapy. I needed to understand why I never questioned how differently we were treated growing up." Avery nodded, surprised, but waiting for her sister to continue. "The therapist helped me see that I was as trapped in my role as the golden child as you were in being overlooked," Madison continued. "I never developed real confidence because I never had to earn anything. Everything was handed to me, including your share." She looked directly at Avery. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know I'm working to understand what happened and my part in it. And I miss my sister." It was the first genuine conversation they'd ever had, one where Madison wasn't centered by default. They talked for 3 hours, peeling back layers of their shared history and examining it with adult eyes. When they parted, Avery felt cautiously hopeful. Not for an immediate reconciliation, but for the possibility of a relationship based on mutual respect rather than assigned roles. Her parents' evolution was slower. Richard remained distant, the dual humiliations of professional disgrace and financial downfall having crushed his self-image. Eleanor made tentative overtures, sending birthday cards and occasional texts that revealed she was grappling with her role in the family's dysfunction. "I always thought I was protecting Madison because she needed more support," she wrote in one message. "I never considered I was hurting you in the process, or that you might need support too, just in different ways." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, something Avery had never received from her mother before. A year after the confrontation, Avery's business was thriving. She had expanded her financial consulting practice to include a special division helping victims of financial fraud rebuild their lives. The knowledge and connections she had gained through her family ordeal proved invaluable in this work. She bought her own home, a Victorian in Cambridge, with a wraparound porch and large windows that filled the rooms with light. It wasn't the family home she had grown up in, but it was wholly hers, purchased with money she had earned ethically. Einstein the dog enjoyed the fenced yard, and Avery planted a garden that bloomed with colors her mother would never have approved of. On a crisp autumn day, similar to the one when she had confronted her family, Avery received a handwritten letter from Mrs. Abernathy. Inside was a photograph of a baby grand piano in the elderly woman's apartment. "I wanted you to see what your integrity made possible," Mrs. Abernathy had written. "Music has returned to my life fully. I have students again. When they play this beautiful instrument, I think of you and the difference one person's courage can make." Avery framed the photo and hung it in her home office, a reminder that justice, while painful, creates space for healing and new growth. 18 months after the family confrontation, Avery received a call from an unexpected source, her father. His voice sounded older, more subdued than she remembered. "I've been working with a therapist," he said after an awkward greeting. "Part of my recovery is making amends where possible. I know I can never fully make amends to you, Avery, but I'd like to try." Avery agreed to meet him at a diner near his new workplace. Richard arrived wearing the uniform of the men's clothing store, a modest suit with a name tag. The visual contrast between this man and the imposing father of her childhood was stark. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "I don't deserve your time, but I'm grateful for it." What followed was the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Richard explained his gradual slide into fraud, beginning with small borrowings that he intended to repay, escalating to systematic theft. As he became addicted to the lifestyle it afforded and the adoration it bought from Eleanor and Madison, "I convinced myself it was victimless," he admitted, "that the market returns would cover it eventually, that my clients wouldn't notice because they trusted me. Every rationalization possible." He paused, stirring his coffee. "But the deeper truth which my therapist helped me see was that I was trying to buy love and admiration. Eleanor married me expecting a certain lifestyle. Madison responded to material things. You were the only one who never seemed impressed by money or status. Maybe that's why you overlooked me," Avery suggested quietly. Richard nodded slowly. "I think that's exactly right. You reminded me of my own father, who valued integrity above all else. Looking at you was like seeing his disappointment in what I'd become. It wasn't a complete explanation for years of emotional neglect, but it was more insight than Avery had ever expected from her father." "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," Richard continued, "but I am asking if there's a way forward for us, some kind of relationship built on honesty instead of performance and pretense." Avery considered his question carefully. "I don't know yet," she answered truthfully, "but this conversation is a start." As they parted, Richard handed her a small package. "Your grandmother's journal that you received as an inheritance. There's more to that story than you know. Read the last entry first." That night, Avery opened the worn leather journal she had set aside years ago, turning to the final entry. It was dated just 3 days before her grandmother's death, the handwriting shaky but determined. "Richard continues to insist I adjust my will to favor Madison, claiming Avery doesn't need the financial support. He doesn't understand that it was never about money. My Avery has her grandfather's moral compass, rare and precious in this family. The journal goes to her because she'll understand its true value, the record of a life lived with integrity, despite mistakes along the way. One day, she may need these words to remember that strength often skips a generation. The money and jewels are just things, but this journal is my heart passed to the granddaughter who shares my spirit." Tears slid down Avery's cheeks as she read her grandmother's final message to her. All these years, she had thought the journal was an afterthought, when in fact, it had been the most meaningful bequest, one her father had never understood. The journal became a treasure trove as Avery read it from the beginning. Her grandmother had faced similar family dynamics, overlooked in favor of more flamboyant siblings. She had built her own path, maintaining her integrity, while forging meaningful connections on her own terms. The parallels to Avery's life were striking, as if her grandmother had mapped the journey ahead for her. This connection to her grandmother provided an unexpected source of comfort and guidance as Avery navigated the evolving relationships with her family. With Madison, there was slow but steady progress toward a more balanced sisterhood. They began monthly dinners, sometimes awkward but increasingly genuine. Madison had started her own journey of self-discovery, breaking free from the golden child role that had limited her as much as it had privileged her. "I'm learning who I really am when I'm not being dad's princess or mom's mini-me," she confided during one dinner. "It's terrifying but also liberating." With Eleanor, progress was more complicated. Unlike Richard and Madison, Eleanor struggled to acknowledge her role in the family dysfunction. She maintained that she had only wanted what was best for both daughters, unable to see how her preferential treatment had caused lasting damage. "I gave you independence because you seemed to want it," she insisted during a tense phone call. Madison needed more guidance. Yet even Eleanor showed small signs of growth. She began asking questions about Avery's work, her home, her friends, showing interest in the woman her daughter had become without her influence. The most surprising development came 9 months after his initial amends attempt, when Richard approached Avery with an unusual proposal. Having discovered that he had a talent for explaining financial concepts to ordinary people, he had begun volunteering at a community center, teaching basic financial literacy to seniors, potential victims of the kind of fraud he had once perpetrated. "I know how the predators think because I was one," he explained. "I can help these people protect themselves in ways most financial advisors can't or won't." He asked if Avery would consider allowing him to volunteer with the Fraud Victim Support Division of her business, speaking to groups about the warning signs of investment fraud from an insider's perspective. The request gave Avery pause. On one hand, Richard's unique insights could genuinely help potential victims. On the other, was she ready to bring her father into her professional world after everything that had happened? After careful consideration and consultation with her team, Avery agreed to a trial arrangement. Richard would speak at 3 community workshops with clear boundaries and supervision. His talks would focus on education, not his personal story, and he would be introduced simply as a former financial industry professional, not as Avery's father. The workshops proved remarkably effective. Richard's insider knowledge, combined with genuine remorse that came through despite his attempts to keep his presentation professional, resonated with attendees. Feedback forms showed that participants felt better equipped to protect themselves from financial predators after his sessions. What Avery hadn't anticipated was how this collaboration would affect their personal relationship. Working toward a shared goal, protecting vulnerable people from financial exploitation, created a new dimension to their interaction, one not based on parent-child dynamics, but on mutual respect for each other's expertise. After the 3rd workshop, Richard approached Avery with uncharacteristic humility. "I know I can never undo the damage I've caused to my clients, to our family, to you. But if I can prevent even one person from suffering, what Mrs. Abernathy experienced, perhaps my remaining years will have some purpose." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation with tearful embraces and instant forgiveness, but it was a pathway forward, a collaborative relationship built on shared values rather than the obligation of family ties. For the first time, Avery and her father were connecting as adults with a common mission, not as a parent and the child perpetually seeking approval. This unexpected alliance expanded over time. Richard's volunteer work with Avery's organization gave him purpose, while her business benefited from his insider perspective on fraud mechanisms. They maintained professional boundaries during these interactions, but the shared work created opportunities for genuine conversation that gradually extended beyond their project. 2 years after the confrontation that had shattered the family facade, the Callaways gathered for Thanksgiving at Avery's Cambridge home. It wasn't a picture-perfect family reunion. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to resurface. But there was also laughter, honest conversation, and the beginnings of authentic connection. As Avery looked around her dining table, she saw her family clearly flawed, struggling, but making genuine efforts to grow. Richard humbled but finding new purpose. Eleanor still learning to see both daughters equally but trying in her imperfect way. Madison breaking free from the golden child role to discover her authentic self, and herself no longer seeking external validation but standing firmly in her own integrity. The inheritance that had triggered this journey, the $800,000 house given to Madison while Avery received nothing, now seemed almost irrelevant. The true inheritance Avery had claimed was self-respect, integrity, and the courage to demand justice, not just for herself, but for others who had been wronged. The house was gone, the money redistributed. What remained was possibility, the chance to build relationships based on truth rather than pretense, on mutual respect rather than assigned roles. It wasn't the ending Avery had envisioned when she smiled in that attorney's office 2 years earlier, but it was perhaps something more valuable, a new beginning. 5 years after the confrontation that transformed the Calloway family, Avery stood in the garden of her Cambridge home watching guests arrive for her engagement party. Her fiancé, Marcus, a ethics professor she'd met while speaking at a conference on financial justice, greeted arrivals with warm handshakes and genuine smiles. At 42, Avery had built a life that reflected her values. Her financial consulting firm had expanded to 3 offices across New England, with the Victim Advocacy Division now a nationally recognized resource. She had published a book on financial ethics that became required reading in business schools. And most surprisingly, she had developed a family relationship based on authenticity rather than performance or preferential treatment. Madison arrived first, her new husband Jack and their 1-year-old daughter in tow. Gone was the entitlement that had once defined her. Parenthood and therapy had softened her edges, helping her develop empathy and self-awareness. Avery, she called, embracing her sister. The house looks amazing. As usual, you've made the place so welcoming without being showy. They had developed a genuine friendship over the years, sisters by choice, now not merely by birth. Madison had found her authentic voice as an interior designer specializing in functional, beautiful spaces for families with special needs children, inspired by her volunteer work at a local children's hospital. Richard and Eleanor arrived separately. They had divorced 3 years earlier, the strain of their reduced circumstances and relationship revelations, finally breaking the marriage that had been built more on appearance than connection. Richard, now 74, walked with a slight stoop but carried himself with quiet dignity. He had become an unexpected advocate for financial literacy, his volunteer work with Avery's organization expanding to a part-time paid position, developing educational materials for seniors. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved to include monthly dinners where they discussed everything from business ethics to philosophy, finding connection through ideas rather than familial obligation. Eleanor had perhaps changed the least, but still showed growth. At 71, she had established a life in Florida, centered around a small circle of friends, and her volunteer work at an animal rescue. She still occasionally made tone-deaf comments about appearance or status, but had developed the self-awareness to catch and correct herself more often than not. As Avery watched her reconstructed family mingle with her chosen family of friends and colleagues, she felt a deep sense of completion. The inheritance that had once seemed so important, the $800,000 house given exclusively to Madison, had ultimately been the catalyst for something far more valuable: truth, justice, and authentic connection. Mrs. Abernathy, now in her mid-70s, arrived with a gift-wrapped package. She had become a beloved mentor to Avery, their relationship evolving from teacher-student to a meaningful friendship. The piano teacher had used her restitution money not only to purchase her baby grant, but also to establish a scholarship for underprivileged music students. "I've brought something special," she said, handing Avery the package. Inside was a framed photograph of Mrs. Abernathy's first scholarship recipient performing at Juilliard with a handwritten note, "From one act of justice, many beautiful things can grow." As the party continued around her, Avery took a moment alone in her study to reflect. The smile she had offered in the attorney's office 5 years ago, the smile that had confused and unsettled her family, had not been about revenge or bitterness. It had been about recognition that sometimes losing what you never really had creates space for building what you truly deserve. The family home, once the symbol of her exclusion from full family membership, was now owned by a young couple with 3 children who filled it with laughter and love. The money that had been restored to victims had created ripples of possibility in dozens of lives. And the family that had been forced to face truth had in their various ways found paths to authenticity and growth. As Avery rejoined her engagement celebration, Marcus caught her eye across the room and smiled a smile of recognition of being truly seen and valued. That, Avery realized, was the real inheritance she had claimed, not a house or money or status, but the courage to stand in her truth and create a life of integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. The circle was complete. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through restoration. The smile that had started this journey was now one of genuine peace. This journey from betrayal to justice has taught me that sometimes the most powerful form of karma isn't about getting even, it's about getting free. I'd love to know if you've experienced family dynamics where justice finally prevailed. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel for more authentic family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself can lead to unexpected healing. Thank you for being part of this community where we can explore these complex family dynamics together. Remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's left to you, it's what you choose to build for yourself.